Welcome to the channel Stories of Slavery. Today's story brings us to 1858 and centers on Daniel Cross, a man forced to stand by as his wife and children were sold away, an act whose aftermath would leave an indelible mark on history. This is a raw and harrowing tale of loss, resilience, and retribution that still reverberates through the ages. Pause for a moment, take a deep breath, and listen closely. Before we dive in, please subscribe to the channel and drop a comment telling us which city and country you're watching from. Your engagement helps ensure these stories stay alive and are never forgotten. Let's start. In the spring of 1891, in a quiet town just beyond Toronto, Canada, an elderly black man drew his final breath. His name was Daniel Cross. He was 71. His once powerful hands, capable of bending iron to his will, now lay still across his chest. Gathered around his bed were his wife Ruth, their 3 children, and 11 grandchildren. His last words, whispered to the woman he had loved for 50 years, were quiet but heavy. "I found them all, Ruth, just as I promised." Only Ruth truly grasped the depth of those words. Because 53 years earlier, in Natchez, Mississippi, Daniel Cross had made a vow that turned the county's most compliant slave into the most dreaded figure the American South had ever known. This is not merely a story about slavery. It is a story about what happens when everything is stripped from a man who has nothing left to lose. This is the story of Daniel Cross, and what he did in 1858 still lingers in the shadows of history. Let me bring you back to an era when human beings were traded like livestock, back to a place where skin color decided whether you lived free or died as property. Back to Natchez, Mississippi, in the heart of the so-called Cotton Kingdom. Perched high on a bluff above the Mississippi River, Natchez in 1858 was among the richest cities in America. It boasted more millionaires per capita than New York. Every cent of that wealth rested on the labor of enslaved people. The dark, fertile soil surrounding Natchez was ideal for cotton, and cotton ruled everything. It drove the nation's economy. Northern mills turned it into fabric. Southern planters grew wealthy selling it. And the enslaved who planted, picked, and ginned it received only pain in return. About 12 miles outside the city lay a plantation named Thornwood, sprawling across more than 4,000 acres of prime cotton land. At its heart stood a grand white, columned mansion visible for miles. The house contained 14 rooms, furnished with imports from France and England. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, silver candlesticks gleamed on every mantel. To the outside world, Thornwood appeared a palace. To the 847 enslaved people who toiled there, it was a prison. An elegant, beautiful prison where families were shattered, bodies broken, and hope sent to die. The owner of Thornwood was Colonel Edmund Whitmore, 62 years old in 1858, a third-generation planter whose grandfather had carved the estate from wilderness in 1795. Tall, silver-haired, with a meticulously waxed mustache, he wore crisp white linen suits even in the sweltering heat. He attended church faithfully, gave generously to charities, and enjoyed universal respect in the county. He was also, by any honest measure, a monster. Colonel Whitmore had one costly vice: gambling. Cards, horses, dice, whatever offered a wager, he pursued, and he nearly always lost. Over time, his losses bled the family fortune dry. Debts mounted, creditors closed in. His solution was simple: sell enslaved people. Families who had lived on Thornwood for generations were torn apart whenever he needed cash. Mothers separated from children, husbands from wives, siblings scattered across the South, never to reunite. To Whitmore, these were not tragedies. They were transactions. Among the hundreds laboring at Thornwood, one man stood apart: Daniel Cross. 38 years old in 1858, he served as the plantation blacksmith. Not especially tall, perhaps 5'10", but broad-shouldered and thick, armed from decades at the forge. His hands were extraordinary, scarred and calloused, yet precise enough to shape iron like clay. He could turn raw metal into tools, horseshoes, hinges, locks, even weapons, anything required. His talent made him invaluable. Planters from across the county sent broken equipment to Thornwood just for Daniel's repairs, paying Whitmore handsomely. A skilled blacksmith outweighed a dozen field hands in value, and Whitmore knew it. Daniel therefore enjoyed rare privileges: his own cabin near the forge, a small garden, and, crucially, never the whip, because damaged hands meant lost profit. In the cruel arithmetic of slavery, Daniel was an asset worth protecting. Yet none of those privileges meant anything to him. Everything that gave his life meaning was his family. Born on Thornwood in 1820, Daniel never knew his mother. She was sold when he was 3, sent to Louisiana. Her name, face, voice, all lost to him, leaving only an H that never faded. His father lasted longer, a tall, quiet field hand who worked from dawn to dusk. When Daniel was 7, his father attempted escape. Caught 2 days later, 15 miles north, he was whipped until his back was raw, then tied to a post in the blazing sun. Infection killed him 3 days later. Daniel watched it all at age 7. From that day, Daniel learned the cardinal rule of survivals: keep your head down. Work hard. Never complain. Never resist. Give them no reason to notice you. Invisibility equaled survival. So he became invisible. He perfected his craft at the forge, spoke only when spoken to, never met a white man's eyes, never raised his voice. For 30 years, Daniel Cross was the model slave, obedient, flawless, and he despised every moment. Then, at age 22, everything shifted. A wagon arrived carrying newly bought slaves from South Carolina. Among them was an 18-year-old woman named Ruth, tall, slender, with eyes that guarded secrets. Sold after her owner's death. She was assigned to cook in the big house. Daniel first noticed her drawing water from the well. She carried herself with a quiet dignity unlike any he had seen. Most enslaved people walked hunched, eyes downcast, worn by degradation. Ruth walked upright. Not defiant, not reckless, but with an inner strength nothing could break. He found reasons to pass the kitchen, to linger near the well. For weeks they exchanged only glances, small nods, seeds of something neither dared name. One night he found her behind the smokehouse, weeping silently. He sat beside her without a word. They remained there an hour, 2 souls sharing an unbearable burden. Finally she spoke. "They sold my sister today. She was 12. I raised her after Mama died." Daniel offered no false comfort. He knew better. Instead he shared his own losses, his mother, his father, the emptiness that lingered. For the first time as an adult, Daniel opened his heart. 6 months later they married. Not legally, of course. The law denied enslaved people even that humanity. But they held a ceremony led by an elderly preacher in the quarters. They jumped the broom and vowed fidelity. Until death or distance do us part. Because everyone knew a master could separate them any time. Yet Whitmore, unusually lenient, allowed it. A content blacksmith worked harder than a heartbroken one. Daniel and Ruth received a small cabin together, and for the first time Daniel tasted something resembling happiness. Then came the children. Samuel arrived in 1843, named for the preacher. Strong and solemn, he inherited his father's build and his mother's watchful gaze. From age 10 he worked the fields, but evenings he spent at the forge, learning fire and metal. Eliza followed in 1846. Gentle, quick to smile, gifted in the kitchen. Her biscuits were legendary, even the mistress occasionally praised them. Benjamin came in 1851, born the same night as the mistress's youngest son. 2 babies hours apart, one destined to own humans, the other to be owned. Benjamin was pure light, constant laughter, Endless questions, trailing his father everywhere. Mesmerized by sparks and hissing metal, Daniel told him stories, not of Africa, a homeland erased across generations, but of hope, of a free north, of a better future. For 16 years Daniel built his life around them. Every hammer blow, every hour of submission, every swallowed rage. It was all for their safety. He believed perfect obedience and exceptional value would protect them. He was wrong. March 14, 1858 began ordinarily. Daniel rose before dawn, kissed Ruth, and headed to the forge. Mid-morning, a wagon arrived at the main house. He noticed but thought nothing of it. Deliveries were common. Then he heard Ruth scream. He knew her voice instantly, knew it the way a man knows his heart beat. It was not anger or pain but pure terror. He dropped his hammer and ran. Faster than ever, boots pounding, lungs burning. The screams grew louder, joined by children crying, men shouting. In the yard he saw a nightmare etched forever in his memory, Ruth on her knees, dragged by her hair toward the wagon. Samuel already bound inside, blood streaming from his brow after fighting 3 men. Eliza frozen near the kitchen door, 2 men approaching her, Benjamin squirming in another man's arms, reaching out, calling for his parents. Daniel charged. 5 overseers tackled him, pinned his face in the dirt, kneed his back, struck his head until the world grayed. When vision cleared, Colonel Whitmore stood over him, cigar in hand, gazing down like at a curious insect. "Now, Daniel," he said calmly, "you're far too valuable to damage. I've invested heavily in your training. Your work brings substantial income. So I'll overlook this outburst. But understand, your family is not valuable." He crouched closer. "Your wife is replaceable. Your son is just muscle. I have hundreds. Your daughter is pretty, but pretty girls abound. And the little one barely earns his keep." Whitmore rose, brushing dust from his trousers. "I have debts, Daniel. Mr. Finch here offered a fair price. Good business." The Cornelius Finch, the notorious New Orleans slave trader, stood beside him, small, rat-eyed, specializing in fancy goods. Young women and girls for sexual exploitation and bulk labor for deadly industries. Finch consulted his notebook. Ruth to a high-end brothel, Samuel to Virginia coal mines, Eliza to a special buyer in Atlanta, Benjamin as a child companion. The words felt unreal. After 16 years of flawless obedience, after every humiliation endured to keep them safe, this. Ruth, no longer screaming, looked at Daniel with a question that broke him. "Why aren't you saving us?" They loaded the wagons, Ruth thrown in like cargo, Samuel bleeding, Eliza walking numbly, Benjamin still crying and reaching. Daniel fought until his voice failed, but it changed nothing. The wagon rolled away. Ruth sat up, looked back, and called, "Find them. No matter how long, find our children." Then they vanished around a corner. The overseers released him. He lay staring at the empty road long after the sun burned overhead. Finally, an overseer kicked him. "Get up, back to work." Daniel rose mechanically, returned to the forge, picked up his hammer. Clang, clang, clang. But inside, the obedient slave died. In his place rose something forged in grief and fury. A man with a terrible purpose. He would find his family. And everyone who took them would pay. In the following weeks, Daniel continued his duties perfectly, showing no sign of rebellion. The overseers relaxed, believing the valuable blacksmith had accepted his loss. They had no clue. Each night alone, he planned. Ruth had secretly taught him to read years earlier, using a stolen Bible. A crime punishable by whipping. That forbidden knowledge now became his weapon. He listened, watched, gathered intelligence. Cornelius Finch had taken them to New Orleans for resale. He needed exact destinations. 3 weeks later, a neighboring planter's coachman, Thomas, an enslaved driver who heard everything, arrived with a broken wheel. Daniel repaired it while casually asking about the Thornwood sale. Thomas, having lost his own brother to the trade, understood the plea. He revealed Ruth sold to the Magnolia House, an elite French Quarter brothel. Women there rarely survived long. Samuel to Harrison Mining Company, Virginia Coal Mines. Average life expectancy 3 to 5 years. Eliza to Judge Cornelius Brandt in Atlanta. Everyone knew what that meant. Benjamin to planter Marcus Webb in Vicksburg as companion for his teenage son. Daniel memorized every detail. 4 locations, 4 states, hundreds of miles apart. An impossible quest for any man, let alone a slave with no freedom, money, or allies. But Daniel was no ordinary man, and he had one hidden advantage: he could forge anything, including tools for a one-man war. Over the next 6 months he worked secretly. By day, routine tasks; by night, deadly preparations, a thin knife hidden in his hammer handle, lockpicks, master keys, weakened, link chain, and special devices known only to him. He also built a mental map of escape routes, safe houses, and underground railroad contacts through whispered networks among the enslaved. By September 1858 he was ready. September 12, a moonless night, chosen because Whitmore was away at races and the drunken overseer Patterson would be asleep by 9. At midnight Daniel moved. First, he quietly recruited and freed 23 trusted enslaved people. Some with sold families, others simply done with chains. Using copied keys, he unlocked the supply shed for food and tools. Then he set a small fire in the hay barn. Time to spread after they vanished into the woods, creating chaos to delay pursuit. They met at the forest edge, slipped north along memorized paths, avoiding roads and dogs. At dawn, 12 miles away, smoke still rising behind them. Daniel halted the group. "This is where we part," he said. "Railroad contacts 2 miles north will guide you to Canada. Don't stop. Don't look back." No one argued when he revealed he was heading south, alone. Everyone understood. They embraced him and disappeared northward. Daniel turned deeper into slave territory, exactly where no one would look for a fugitive. He was not escaping. He was hunting. The trek to New Orleans, 300 miles, took 3 weeks on foot, moving only at night, living off the land, guided by stars and instinct. Reward posters soon appeared: 5,000 lozenge for Daniel Cross, the largest bounty in Mississippi history. He saw one, smiled grimly, and kept moving south. October 3, 1858, he reached New Orleans, the nation's largest slave market, yet also home to free black communities, where a skilled man could blend in. He found work at a blacksmith shop owned by free black man Jean Baptist Merrier, posing as a freedman from Virginia. Over 2 weeks he learned the city and located the Magnolia House, an exclusive brothel on a quiet French Quarter street. Heavily guarded, he discovered the back entrance used for deliveries was watched by one guard from 2:05 a.m. On October 17, at 3 a.m., posing as a repairman, he talked his way past the guard and slipped inside. Using picks he opened Ruth's barred room. She was gaunt, bruised, gray-streaked, but alive. "I came for you, just like you asked," he whispered. They escaped silently. 2 blocks away, the Magnolia House erupted in flames. Daniel's planted device of whale oil and slow fuse. 23 men perished. Newspapers called it accidental. Daniel and Ruth knew better. They never spoke of it again. They hid 2 weeks in an underground railroad safe house while Ruth regained strength and shared every horror she had endured. When she finished, Daniel said simply, "I'm going for the others." Ruth replied, "I'm coming with you." No argument swayed her. They were her children too. November 1, they headed north toward Virginia. 2 winter months later they reached Richmond, then the Harrison coal mines west of the city. Daniel again found blacksmith work. Ruth worked as a laundress, gathering information. Samuel had survived 9 months but was broken. 3 fingers lost, lungs ruined by dust, repeatedly whipped. The mines were fortress-like, heavily guarded. Christmas Eve 1858, while owner Harrison Cole celebrated, Daniel dropped homemade smoke bombs into ventilation shafts, forcing evacuation in chaos. He entered through a clear shaft, found Samuel barely conscious, carried him out unnoticed. Later, after hiding Samuel and Ruth safely, Daniel returned. He confronted Cole alone, broke his wrist, pressed the man's own pistol to his forehead, explained exactly why, then pushed him 200 feet down a mine shaft. By morning, the family was 50 miles away, heading south to Atlanta. Samuel grew stronger daily, hearing Ruth's story and understanding his father's path. Early February 1859, they reached Atlanta. Judge Cornelius Brandt, 67, respected, notorious for his tastes in young girls, kept Eliza nearly a year. Daniel watched the mansion 3 weeks, learning routines. He also learned Brandt was dying of stomach cancer. Months left. Death seemed too merciful. February 23, Daniel entered silently, reached the sick man's bedroom. What transpired over 3 hours remained unrecorded. The next morning, Brandt was found begging for death. He suffered 47 more days. Doctors blamed cancer. Daniel knew otherwise. Eliza, thin and hollow-eyed, began healing in her mother's arms. One remained Benjamin in Vicksburg. Daniel sent Ruth, Samuel, and Eliza ahead to Memphis. He traveled west alone, but first detoured to Thornwood. The plantation lay in ruins, fire damage, mass escapes, unpaid debts, seized land. Whitmore was broke and abandoned, alcoholic. Daniel confronted him in the library, presented the masterpiece chain-etched with 147 names of every person Whitmore had sold. He reminded him of the words, "Your family is not valuable." Then, "I found them all. Everyone who took them is dead or wishes they were." What followed in that library stayed unwitnessed and unrecorded, but whispered legends say Whitmore was found days later, chain cutting into his flesh, begging for death for weeks. Daniel left Thornwood forever at sunrise. 6 weeks later, he reunited with his family in Canada, settling in a black community near Detroit. He never forged again. Instead, he taught literacy to fugitives. Ruth ran a boarding house that secretly sheltered runaways. Samuel became a doctor serving the poor. Eliza founded an orphanage for black children. Benjamin became a lawyer, returning post-Civil War to prosecute former slave owners and win reparations. Daniel died March 14, 1891, exactly 33 years after the sale, surrounded by family. His last words, "I found them all, just like I promised." His tombstone reads simply, Daniel Cross, 1820-1891. Husband, father, teacher. He kept his promise. Official history recorded the events as unrelated tragedies. But the truth lived on in black oral tradition. Songs and stories of the blacksmith who walked through hell to bring his family home. Daniel Cross was no saint. He killed, he burned. He took justice where none was offered. But he did it for love. The system told him his family was property, his love meaningless. Daniel disagreed and proved it, whatever the cost. Some called him monster, some hero. The truth lies between. But one fact stands clear: when they took everything from Daniel Cross, they created something far more dangerous. A man with nothing to lose and everything to fight for. And in the end, that man won. This was the story of Daniel Cross. A story that still haunts history, a story that will never be forgotten.